Good day, everyone. My name is John Corstein. I'm Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center here at the Mariners Museum and Park. And as usual, a couple times a month, I tell stories about the Civil War at sea. And it's all based on the connection with the Monitor. And this program today, the Laird Rams, is truly connected with the Monitor. You see, when they build the Monitor, people like Gustavus Vasa Fox go, "Ah, that's our ship," and they keep making the same type of ship, some improvements. But the ship was not seaworthy, it didn't have a lot of firepower, it had a lot of problems. And so when the war breaks out, Stephen Russell Mallory, Secretary of the Navy, immediately says, we got to have ironclads. We got to have those ironclads with speed, with rifle cannons and rams, so that we can overwhelm the North. North had no ironclads at the time. However, Mallory was such a brilliant person, he knew that the Confederacy lacked the infrastructure to really build complex ships. And when you look at the plans of the Monitor, you start to realize that it takes skilled machinists and mechanics to put this vessel together. And when you think just about the Monitor, all the parts show up at Continental Iron Works, so it's almost interchangeable parts. The Confederates could never do that. In fact, there was no place they could really make marine engines at the start of the war. So what Mallory implied was, well, we can't build really offensive ships, but we can buy them. Remember the idea of cotton is king? And so they want to go into Europe and especially Great Britain to secure the construction of ships like this. And as you can see, this is a twin-turreted ship with actually a 6-foot freeboard. How much did the Monitor have? 18 inches. Then you have these bulwarks. Oh my gosh, right there. Right, so they could put them up, and that meant that's an additional 5 feet. So they can actually operate an 11-foot freeboard, so to speak, which meant they were more stable and so forth. Now, the first ships that the Confederates are going to go after are going to be ships that become known as the CSS Alabama and the CSS Florida. And they're able to skirt laws in Great Britain known as the Foreign Enlistment Act. And the Foreign Enlistment Act was all about that, Great Britain's neutral. They recognized the Confederacy as a belligerent, but not as a nation. Although William Gladstone, a leading politician during the time, says they are a nation. They have created a government. They have created an army. They're in the process of creating a navy. They've created everything that makes them a self-sufficient nation. And not all the parliamentarians agreed with him, but he gave this great speech at Newcastle. Anyway, so as we see, one of the leading shipyards in Great Britain would be here in Birkenhead, which is across the Mersey River from Liverpool, and this is the Laird Brothers Shipyard. It was usually the fathers started the shipyard. They started building boilerplate. Then they realized they could build iron-hulled ships and so forth. So they developed a big business, and the key to this yard are the types of ships it can make. There's no yard in America is equipped to build ships like they could. And so, I mean, they could retool and do all sorts of other things. But right off the bat, Laird Brothers is where you want to order an ironclad from. Now, remember, the surge of ironclads all begins during the Crimean War. Britain and France both built floating iron-cased batteries. That transposed into building frigates that are going to be iron-plated. And so the Warrior is one of the best examples for the British, the French, Le Gorée. And so these were a change in naval warfare. So Mallory had the great sense to send one agent to Europe. He actually sends two agents. One is James North, and we don't like to talk about him because he did not do a good job. But the man that was amazing in what he did, I'll come back to that, is this man. Right? From outside of Savannah, his brother, Irvine, half-brother actually, Irvine Bulloch, was a midshipman on the Nashville, was sailing master on the Shenandoah, was an officer or lieutenant on board the Alabama. So he's on three of the most notable Confederate commerce raiders. But Bulloch had served in the U.S. Navy. He retired from the U.S. Navy, resigned to become a ship captain, and actually had a mail route between New York and Savannah. So he's a very outstanding, great seamanship, great understanding of ships. And so when he's sent to Great Britain, he is able to use all these subterfuges to, be able to build these ships under the eyes of Great Britain. Remember, they're into neutrality. Foreign Enlistment Act said you can't produce any fighting materiel for belligerents at war. Okay? So how do we get around that? Well, the Alabama is just a cruiser, and so they take it to the Azores and put guns on it. So they skirted that act. Now, the guy who's really going to try and deal with this, so that's Alabama, that's where the ships, is this man, Charles Francis Adams. Dad was a president, grandfather was a president. He has an anti-British look about it, okay? I guess you can just tell that. And Adams keeps contacting this man, Lord John Russell, who was foreign minister for Great Britain during this time period. And Russell tried as best possible to say, well, look, they're not, you got to bring me proof if they're building ships for the Confederacy. And there was no proof because of the paper trails that Bulloch created. So Bulloch wants to build ironclads. And so we're going to see that they will start, this is Alabama. You can see how powerful it looks. It's not iron, but the big thing is they will start to build these ships. Now, whoops, oh gosh, I don't know what I've done there. So Bulloch signs a contract with Laird for them to build two ironclads, and they are known as the North Carolina class in the Confederacy. He chooses the same yard because he said these things could be done much more quickly if they're built to the same yard. They cost over 93,000 pounds to build. So these are expensive little toys. The Confederates gets the money through Erlanger loan of cotton, and so they start building these ships. Now let me just talk about what is the Scorpion class as it becomes when the British actually will acquire it. The Scorpion class 240 feet in length, 40.4 feet beam. She had a draft of 15 feet. She also was armed with 4 9-inch Mark I rifles from Woolworth's arsenal. So these are pretty, definitely 9-inch rifle is kind of like a 200-pounder rifle. So, you know, the U.S. Navy doesn't have guns like that. And then when they built the hull, they did a double bottom. Then they also divided the entire hull into watertight compartments. So if someone hits me in the bow, right, that's okay, because, you know, I got that compartment that could be closed off. This thing's armed with a 7-foot-long ram, and that means it's dangerous. I think I told you that 10.5 knots. In fact, during its sea trials, the Scorpion will make 11 knots. So that without sails, it's bark rigged. And so, what are some of the other features? Well, it's got 2 turrets, and the turrets they build for this are known as the Coles turret. And I think some time ago I gave a lecture about all these different turrets. There are 3 really turrets being made during the war. Erickson style that sits on a spindle, James Eade style that goes on a cylinder that goes down into the ship, and then the Coles turret. Cowper Coles is a pain and you know what to all Royal Navy officials. He kept saying, we got to build this, we got to do this. And so he comes up with his own turret design, which the turret sat on a platform that had a cylinder going down into the ship so that they could turn it. And, you know, the monitor turrets would jam often from shot and other problems. Cole's turret did not, because of its unique design. For us, it had these leather straps all around it so that water wouldn't come through that joint of where the turret makes it to the vessel or to the deck. So this is pretty good. Load it from within the ship easily. You don't have to stop the ship to load it. Now, these turrets are very effective, and they are going to appear on many Royal Navy ironclads as time goes by. But they're protected. Just think of this protection. The turrets, part of them have 4.5 inches of iron, but the area around the gun ports, which is what you want to shoot at, have 10 inches of iron. Right? Now, these ships are uniquely built because there's going to be a lattice of half-inch iron, then that's going to be backed by 6 inches of teak. Then there's going to be supports. Then that's going to be supported by 2 inches of iron, then 10 inches of teak, and then 4.5 inches of armor, except where the guns are. Now, they did not, they armed the bow with, or protected the bow with 3.5 inches of iron, and the stern with 2.5 inches of iron. So when you start to think, they're laminating the closest thing you can get to steel. The monitor has no backing, so you know there's not a lot of give when a shot hits a monitor's turret. In this case, there is a lot of give. Now, the bulwarks are going to be right here, and or wait a second. It's kind of crazy, right here and right down here where the turrets are. So they have to turn those down when going into battle. So I think the big thing we have to think about is how do this class of vessels compare to a monitor? Now, Admiral Gordon, who sent two monitors to try and stop the Stonewall, which is a whole nother ironclad built in France, and he said, well, I'm going to blow it out of the water. Well, this is not a ship you can blow easily out of the water. Actually, America was afraid that these ships would be turned over to the Confederacy. And why is that? Well, let's just think about modern naval or Civil War naval tactics. What's the thing that's hurt in the South the most? The blockade. U.S. Navy has over 670 ships, but only 70-some are what? Ironclad. And many of those ironclads can't leave the rivers where they have been built. So what's going to happen is that the technique of war, in this case, if these two ships make it to America, is that they'll go against the blockading fleet. Monitors cannot be in the outer ring of the blockade of Charleston or Wilmington. They have to stay pretty close in line because they have an 18-inch freeboard. We've got 11-inch freeboard, right? And so the kind of ideal what the ships would be used as would be as raiders that would slip in and actually, destroy, break the blockade, probably not encounter a monitor, but all these wooden ships, which it would sink at ease. Remember, it's got a 7-foot prow, as they called it, 9-inch rifle guns. They were ready for anything. Now, what makes this so good is that the Confederates knew this was going to tip the war in their favor. Now, the problem is when these would get to the era of war, they would have serious problems. Where am I going to get more ammunition? Where am I going to get more fuel and so forth? So that's going to be an issue. But that issue is going to be dissipated away because of the American approach towards the construction of these ships. Now, so actually, James Bulloch signs the contract with Laird to build the ships through Fraser, Trentham and Company, which are the agents that they had in Liverpool. They're cotton agents, but they handled all this money. So Bulloch said, we want to build these ships, puts a down payment, and everything, they start building them. As the news comes that these ships are being built, who are they being built for? Now, they have turrets. That means they're warships. Well, technically, they're not a warship until they have what? Cannons on. So there are all these skirting of laws, excuses. The best excuse is, oh my gosh, we're building these for the Khedive of Egypt. And so that makes sense. The El Toussaint is one of them, and El Mansour is the other. And so everyone goes, oh, well, that makes sense. Egypt wants to have cannon, ships, and so, yeah, that makes sense. Well, Charles Francis Adams actually sends a message to the Khedive of Egypt. What are you going to do with these ironclads? The answer is, what ironclads? So everyone goes, oh my gosh, what's happening here? And this is real kind of underneath the level. Now, so how did Bulloch try to get around this? Well, he actually had Laird sell the ships to Gravely and Company of France. And Gravely and Company, the group of investors that are actually pro-Confederate. I just want to remind you all how pro-Confederate Europe was and why they were so pro-Confederate. Number one, in the summer of 1862, Gladstone gave this thing about, they started a nation, they got an army, they won victories. And after the Second Manassas, the British were really considering recognizing the Confederacy. Why would they want to recognize the Confederacy? They wanted to do that because America is a rising industrial power. So anything you could do to weaken that meant that England or Great Britain would still have a leadership role in industrialization, industrial world. And so I think, but Lee has a drawn battle in Antietam. They say, well, maybe we should wait and see. Meanwhile, in March of '63, guess what's laid down? Those two rams, and they're under construction. Charles Francis Adams knows what's going on, but he can't prove it. And he keeps sending letters to Lord Russell saying, hey, you guys are doing this, and this is against your own laws. Lord Russell says, well, I sent it forward for consideration. In other words, leave me alone. So now, what about France? Why do they want to support the Confederacy? It's all about their industrial mills making cloth. Where do they get all that cloth from? The cotton in the South. So so France is doing the same thing as Great Britain. There's great industrial cities that are making cloth and so forth. Well, the big thing is going to happen is that Louis Napoleon, Emperor of France, has, Mexico had a lot of problems in the early 1860s. In other words, they borrowed a bunch of money so they could build the great Mexican Railroad from Veracruz to Mexico City. And so this would have, give them a tremendous advantage. Well, the Mexicans default on their loans. And you know what default's all about. I guess we heard in the news. The big thing is that the English, Spanish, and the French said, hold on here. We're going to send troops to make sure you pay. Well, this is somewhat successful, but while they're there, Louis Napoleon, what does he want to do? Well, I think I'll keep my troops here. He sends an additional 35,000 soldiers, and he transformed the Mexican Republic into the Mexican Empire with Maximilian as the emperor. Wow. And with the French Foreign Legion, French troops, they're able to defeat the rebels and so forth. It becomes, a threat. Now, what is that a threat to? The United States. And they were perceived as a possible ally to whom? The Confederacy. In fact, the Confederacy is the first nation, if you call the Confederacy a nation, according to Gladstone we do, recognize the Mexican Empire. Because this was a great way to get supplies into the South through Mexican ports, cross the border, and there it is. So this is the occupation of Mexico is '63. This is the very same time when we're talking about these rams. So the United States is facing big-time problems, especially when you get to summer of 1863. What are the problems that we're facing? We got the French in Mexico. We got the Confederates winning battles, like, Chancellorsville. Yes, the defeat at Gettysburg is troublesome to many, but the biggest trouble for the British is that the Emancipation Proclamation meant that the war was about ending slavery. And so not all the British said, well, we ended slavery some time ago, and we don't know if we want to be involved in this conflict. But we do want to make money, and the one way we're going to make money is what? Through these ships. So come September, Charles Francis Adams is nervous, at wit's end. He sends a nice note to Lord Russell saying, hey, are you really going to let these things go through? Russell said, well, there's no proof they're intended to the Confederacy. And Adams, with all his agents, they were interviewing dock workers, shipyard workers, and no one could say, oh, yes, these are going to the Confederacy. So the end result is that we have to have the subterfuge is working very well, and Lord Russell's kind of looking beyond it, right? There's no problem here. Bring me proof. Well, Adams gets so upset that he, on September 5th, 1863, is going to send a note to Lord Russell saying, look, you and I both know those ships are going to the Confederacy, and if they make it to the Confederacy, we will have a state of war between Great Britain and the United States of America. Now, so what does that mean to these folks? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, England, when it looks at it, well, in the north, they have over 500,000 men under arms, right? Either training or in armies sitting throughout the south. So one place that is very vulnerable is what? Canada. The same thing we wanted in during the War of 1812, they can't have. So what this really boils down to is that Lord Russell has to think about that. He then realizes with the Royal Navy and with the bases at Halifax and Bermuda, they have, I don't know how many people have been to Bermuda. If you go down to Hamilton, you see the Royal Navy dockyards. It's tremendous. So Bermuda is 670 miles away from North Carolina coast, Wilmington. So using that as a base, the Royal Navy, who already has 2 ironclads, they're building more, they have floating batteries, plus they have the largest navy in the world, except the United States is rapidly passing them. But if you put a former ferry boat up against a British frigate, what's going to happen to the ferry boat? And so the odds were that, yes, if the British intervened, that would mean the United States would were forced to let the Confederate states go. But that did not happen because Lord Russell weighs the risks involved and then takes over the 2 rams himself. Next question is, what are they going to do with it? And so Bravery and Company is going to contract several French yards to build ironclads, similar to, but not as good as, the Scorpion class. So the end result is going to be that the British say, well, we'll put these in our Navy because they match up better against those French ironclads they are now building. So this becomes a huge, huge issue for the British to escape the problem by buying these 2 ships, and one is still in service in 1922, believe it or not. Now, so I think the fear of these ships, let's compare this ship against a mono. Okay? Let's just pick a class, Passaic class. How's that? Well, so Passaic class is not seaworthy, right? Take it out to sea, it almost sinks. A couple of them do sink just from wave action. They only have 2 cannon, 1 15-inch gun, and 1 11-inch gun. Now, what is the power of a 15-inch gun? I have to tell you, you can go back and look at my lectures about the Battle of Wassaw Sound, where the Hawken with 5 shots defeats the CSS Atlantic. You can look at the Battle of Mobile Bay, where they penetrate the shield of the Tennessee. Now, of course, the Union monitors are right up on top of the Tennessee, but they do break the casement, and light comes through. You have light coming through your casemate, you're not going to do well. So that 15-inch gun carries a major wallop. A solid shot is 440 pounds. Its muzzle velocity is over 1,500 feet per second. And it has a range of 1,700 yards. So that makes it a pretty effective. Now, I'll tell you, with a 15-inch gun, you really want to be from here to there. You know, if you're going to have an impact on a Confederate ironclad. Whereas this bad boy has 9-inch rifle guns. And so those 9-inch rifle guns, actually, one Mark I was rated at 9,000 yards of range. That's unbelievable. Almost to me, I had to reread that chart a couple of times. And so what was the fear? The fear is that this ship, what it can't destroy, it can outrun. Monitor speed, 7 knots. They never get them to go any faster during the Civil War. This is 10.5 knots. So the advantage the Scorpion would bring to the, or we would call it North Carolina, or Mississippi was the other one. That's the Confederate names. They would have disrupted the entire blockade. And if well supplied, which by that time, with impunity, they could go to Bermuda and get more ammunition and coal, they could threaten all the major U.S. ports. That is the fear that rests in the American minds. You just start to put charts up. Now, I have a friend, a professor, a friend of mine in England. We had a little discourse about what is a 15-inch gun? Is that going to be better? Is it going to blow up the Scorpion class? My contention is it's not going to get close enough to do it. Yes, a 15-inch gun can break through 6 inches of iron. However, it's got to do it at a reasonably close range. And it's a shell gun. Shell gun means it's like a shotgun, you know. I'm going to hit something, but I got to be close to really hit it right. A rifle gun means I've got better aim, I've got better abilities. I got a better turret, I got better engines, I got better speed. Actually, I can even operate under sail if I have a problem with my engine. So, the big fear of the Scorpion class was really a serious one for the United States in 1863. And it is Charles Adams and the council in Liverpool that are going to really bring up all this information constantly. Nothing is conclusive proof, and Lord Russell tells Adams that, but Adams makes that threat. And actually, Lord Russell backdates his correspondence to say, well, I was already going to have them seized. And so that is how these large rams never make it to the Confederacy. So, do I have any questions? Okay. Well, 18 inches, they did increase that with later models at the end of the war, but the Tonawanda class is going to have built-in bulk words so it can go to sea. They have several ships that do make it across the Atlantic. So the question is, what is the freeboard for a monitor? And so at best, it's 2 feet. So one tactic that could have been used is, of course, let's say North Carolina swoops in off of Charleston, sinks a bunch of wooden vessels, which it could with ease. The monitors come along. Well, they could draw the monitors out to deeper water. And the deeper the water, the deeper or the more impact of the waves on the ships. And so that would have been my tactic. Let's draw them out. And while we're drawing them out, we can outrange them with our 9-inch guns. So in essence, the monitor is at a disadvantage because of the lack of seaworthiness. Now, the Scorpion class is going to roll significantly. In heavy seas, your main deck would be awash with water, but they still have sufficient freeboard to make it happen. Copper Coles is really influenced by this, and he'll actually build a ship known as the HMS Captain, with a much lower freeboard, which will sink in a storm. So the conditions of battle make a huge difference. I can outrun you, I can outshoot you, I have greater firepower. So I have to contend, and Howard Fuller, if you're listening, I have to contend that no monitor could really face up against a Scorpion class ship. Yes, ma'am. No, the question was, did the United States ever try to buy any of these? The answer is no. I think part of the problem is that we are a growing industrial nation, and we know we can build our own ships. Number two, Ericsson's a good salesman. He said, yeah, my ship is wonderful, you know? And look what it did to the Merrimack. Well, it didn't do anything to the Merrimack other than get in its way. I have to say that the United States never entertained purchasing ships abroad. Neither did they. I mean, 2 ships, the Dundenberg and the New Ironsides, were more case-mated ships. However, the New Ironsides had too great of a draft, insufficient armor at bow and stern, so I don't think it could have gone up against a Scorpion class ship, because Scorpion class has turrets, well-protected turrets, and plus the New Ironsides did not have the armament really to contend with the armor on these ships. Yes, sir. They will be commissioned the U.S. Excuse me again. The British Navy in late '65. Now they could have been in a position to take them to sea in late '63 or early '64. These ships, one was already launched, and that's what sends the fear. Once it's launched in the water, that's the danger. Because the example of the Alabama plays very strongly into this. Because Alabama went and got all its guns, they had a ship waiting for them. And so that gave them it made them into a warship. And then the crew were mostly British. Semmes gives them a patriotic speech, right? And they all go, well, so what? And I said, you're going to get a bunch of gold. And they said, yay, we'll join, you know? And, Semmes had a way of convincing people. Old beeswax, as we'll call them. Yes, Kira?
We have two online questions. Maybe we'll take one and then another from the room and then another online. So Ray says, you mentioned that one of the two ironclads was still in service in the 1920s. Was that British Navy, and what happened to the other ironclad?
Well, in 1922, it was actually a target ship. So, you know, I'm not going to say it was still commissioned, but it was, and that was a Viren. And the Scorpion will be taken off the Royal Navy list in, I think it's 1902 or so. And then it's also used as a target ship, then sold for scrap. Poof, gone. If it had made it to the United States, it'd still be floating. We'd have it here. You know, something like that anyway. So yes, they have a long service, but they're outdated the moment they hit the water. Their armament is not sufficient. Their freeboard is good, but not sufficient. Its flat bottom made it roll, so it wasn't the great sailor. However, it had a double bottom. It had watertight compartments. So that meant it was a step. You know, the Monitor is one step. Hey, here's a turret. Next step is, hey, here's a seaworthy ship with turrets. But we still have sails. Our next step is to do what? Eventually do away with the sails, because the captain, it sinks with a limited freeboard because it's in a storm off of Spain, the coast of Spain, and they still have their sails. That's not a good thing when you don't have good freeboard. Once you make one lean, the ship is gone. So anyway, I think that answers everything. Okay, and who? Yes, Fred. No, the question is, did the Scorpion and the Wyvern see any action? And the answer is, no, they did not. They were actually sent to be guard ships. One went to Bermuda, right? And one went to Hong Kong. So they were seaworthy enough to make that trip, so that's important. But they also realized engines are starting to improve, so we're getting 15 knots, 20 knots out of a steam engine, and it will increase even more. We also learned that all the way we build the armor, remember the Scorpion class has, just with a turret, it's got 10 inches of iron. That iron is going to be backed by 10 inches of teak, then you add another 1.5 inches of boilerplate, then you have some support beams, then you have an iron lattice put on it. So, you know, so I think that they were getting towards steel. The steel is what really makes these obsolete. Yes, sir. Well, it was a boatyard beginning in the firm began in the 1820s. They started making boilers for ships. Then they realized that, oh my gosh, we perfected a technique that makes safe boilers, so we can make iron-hulled ships. And so Laird Brothers goes into a really pretty big business. You know, iron hulls are better than wooden hulls, you know, it's that way. So by the 1840s, they became one of the leading shipyards in Great Britain. And they'll stay in business. They merged with another company. They are still active today, but in a much smaller way. They're not building as many ships. Look how many ships in there. One of those ships is Hull 290, right? And that is the Alabama. So look, I got just from the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ships under construction. We only build one ironclad aircraft carrier at the shipyard at a time. So anyway, it was a huge yard, and its legacy is a big part of Royal Navy legacy. Yes. Well, the best example I can, and the question is, this large shipyard in England, how did it influence shipbuilding in America? My best example would be the creation of the Newport News Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Corporation. When Collis Potter Huntington built that, he recruited skilled workmen from various yards in Scotland and in England. You come here, I'm going to pay you more. You're going to have a better life. You're going to be in America and all these great things. And so that's the nucleus of his firm, his shipbuilding company, is based on people being brought from overseas to build iron-hulled ships, then steel-hulled ships. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Bob would like to know, did either of the Laird rams see action in the British Navy?
No, they did not. They were guard ships. And as guard ships, they really went to places that, who's going to attack Bermuda? I hadn't thought about it. I'd like to go there, but I have my own invasion plans. But different. Hong Kong, no one's going to attack Hong Kong with the British fleet around. Japanese didn't try until 1941. So they were they're called guard ships. They also are referred to as block ships. The blocking the entrance to the harbor. Yes, sir. There are only two under, the question is, were there more of the Scorpion class? The answer is a 2-ship class. They already know when they're finishing the ship that this is more of a coastal vessel, not a deep water ship. Now, yes, could it make it across the Atlantic? And the answer is yes, it could. The Stonewall made it across, and even though it had some trouble some days, but never was in danger of sinking, and I think that's the same case for the Scorpion class. However, it's not meant for fleet action, and still by the 1880s, fleet action was what was most important. So they still hadn't gone away from crossing the T and doing things like that. Okay? Any other questions? Oh, wow. I missed you. Yes, ma'am. Cool. When was coal introduced as propulsion into ships? As soon as they started building ships with engines, coal was there. Coal was used from the Claremont, 1807, all the way up to when they start building dreadnoughts. And you have to realize that they used oil. There's this quick transition right before, during, and especially thereafter of ships using oil, because oil was more efficient. You didn't have to reload the coal as much. And so, yeah, coal for 100 years, that's what you had to have. Today, we still we don't have any coal-fired ships. We only have oil or nuclear. Okay? Any other questions? If not, I want to remind you all that these two ships pose a tremendous danger to the United States of America. They could have, properly commanded, they could have changed the course of the war. That's what made Adams so fearful. That's what made Adams, you know, and he was working with William Seward, so he doesn't say anything that William Seward doesn't say, okay. So they recognized if one of these vessels makes it to America, it's toast. They have nothing to counter it. And because there are tactics that you could fight against a monarchy. Number one, range. Number two, let's come out deep water and fight. You know, and we don't have to shoot you. You're just going to sink. Plus, it's got a ram, and that's a 7-foot prow. And you don't really can't tell from these pictures, but when you look at the stone wall, that had a 7-foot ram, and it is a major way to sink another ship, especially if it's a wooden ship. So, yes, ma'am. Oh, yay.
Ray would also like to know, in the ships that had both types of propulsion, sail and screw, did they ever use both at the same time, or were the two systems used separately?
Well, it depends on the time table, but it was said about the Warrior that if they were under sail and steam, it could make 18 knots. Okay? So that's kind of fast. Once again, the British are making ships that if I can't sink you, I can outrun you. And so the Merrimack, which is the ship we know very well here at the Mariners Museum, the Merrimack actually operated mostly under sail. It was cheaper, right, than having all this coal. However, it used those those steam engines to go in and out of port. And so that meant they had better control over the vessel. And it was also because they could use them in battle with greater maneuvering. I have to say that after the Civil War, the masts become less and less important, and they become almost a symbol. You know, they have one mast, but it's really a crow's nest, so we can look out for who's ahead of us. Yes, they did operate together. Generally speaking, the U.S. Navy in the post-Civil War era, David Dixon Porter, who was Rear Admiral, I can say other things about him, but he was head of naval operations in essence. And so he told all his captains, you know, you're going to use the sails. And if you use too much coal, I'm going to charge that excess coal to your own account. So most of these ships use sail primarily. And so that was, some ships they took the engines out of because they didn't need them. I think the Idaho is one example that Worden takes it, John Worden takes it on a trial trip and goes back into Brooklyn Navy Yard and says, you know, these engines don't work, it's a great sailing ship. So they take the engines out because it's a waste of space because they want to make it into a store ship. But they had bad engines known as Dickerson engines. And that's another topic for another day. Okay? And, oh, yes, sorry, you know, thank you for your help. So, 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be giving a lecture about, I can't remember.
I will look it up.
I know it's something good.
They're all good.
Pardon? Yeah, maybe I haven't made it up in my head yet. I know it's a good one. Oh, it's on John Mercer Brooke.
Yeah.
And he is one of the most brilliant scientists to serve during the Civil War. In fact, David, I hate to keep quoting David Dixon for him, because he's not my hero, but he said, of all these officers, and over 270 officers went south when the Civil War broke out. Some of them were like very old, like Victor Randolph. Some of them were just not top leadership quality. But he said the only two officers that the U.S. Navy missed that went south, John Mercer Brooke and Catesby Ap Roger Jones. So we're going to learn about one of that dynamic duo who actually work on the transformation of the Merrimack into the powerful ironclad ram, the CSS Virginia. So, until later then, huzzah!